Good day to everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about Congress. Congress, in many regards, has long been one of the most interesting of all our institutions, simply because it's so complex. We have 435 members in the House of Representatives, 100 senators, and of course, if we enter and allow a couple more states to come in, like Puerto Rico or District of Columbia, that could increase even further. Congress is amazing today in the fact that it doesn't seem to get things done. It's been very, very dysfunctional. Some of the problems today are almost the opposite of some of the problems we incurred before. And I will discuss each a little bit, but starting with what we're going on today. Since at least 2008, Congress has had a hard time getting things done unless they have a majority of both parties in both houses and the presidency of the same party. But starting in 2010, that stopped until recently. Of course, during the Trump period, there was a period in which they did have a majority, although it was very slim and it was hard to get things done. The reason they are having trouble seems to be that there's very little political gain from compromise anymore. Most congressional districts are pretty much one-party districts. You can get nominated, for example, in a Republican congressional district as a Democrat, but you're almost impossible to win. California's entire state has become somewhat that way. The real competition is Democrat versus Democrat, not Democrat versus Republican. So therefore, if you're talking about Republicans competing against each other, they're going to be on average much, much more conservative than they would be if they had a real chance of having a Democratic rival. And the same, of course, is also true for the Democrats. They can be more progressive than they would be otherwise, particularly in primaries and all, if they don't have to worry about it. When they go to the general election, they're basically going to win anyway. Examples of this are obvious. The grand failure of the Grand Compromise of 2011 was a good example. The Speaker of the House, a Republican, and Obama had worked out a great compromise. Obama had actually given in more territory than Democrats were comfortable with. And in fact, he had given in more and conceded more than had John Boehner, the Republican Speaker. However, the House would not pass it because they were just too rigid. They could not accept any compromises to Democrats. Another classic example was the appointment of Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court. And for a year, Congress would not confirm him. The Senate would not even talk to him. This is totally unprecedented in the history of this country and possibly marks the end of the Senate as we know it. The failure of Obamacare back in 2008, 2009, it passed. It was pretty popular in terms of provisions. The individual provisions were liked by the public, even though Republicans could somehow paint it as a whole to be negative. And it's become very popular now. But it did not receive a single GOP vote, despite a year-long attempt to find some areas of compromise. And of course, the tax cut of 2017 by Donald Trump, primarily benefiting the wealthy, passed without a single Democratic vote. We are seeing the same thing occur today on the Biden administration. We are seeing things getting passed, but by the narrowest of margins, strictly on party lines. To some degree, part of the role in Congress traditionally has been to compromise, to find some middle ground. We don't seem to be doing that very well this time, possibly because of the gerrymandered districts that allow for a single candidate, a single party to dominate. and not have a challenge during the general election. Now, I'll have to tell you that things were not necessarily great beforehand. Congress was the area of pluralism. Yes, parties counted. They made a big difference in some issue areas. But a lot of stuff also went on in committees, and we talked about often a sub-governments almost in those little committees. And the results of the committees would sometimes have provisions that were extremely favorable to special interests. And there wasn't anybody to actively challenge them. Yes, the political parties could, but there wasn't necessarily a benefit from that. It was kind of, if you support what comes out of my committee, you'll get some more. I'll give you support when things come out of your committee. Most certainly, there was a large number of amounts of lobbying and influence at the time. And one reason you just can't get out of your student loan is because those financial interests dominated so heavily in Congress during the early years of the Bush administration, W's administration, that after $200 million of lobbying and intense pressure, Congress passed an extraordinarily strict bill relative to student loans and other kinds of debt. Do we need another way of dealing with things? There are potential solutions. One would be to make gerrymandering districts unconstitutional. Another might be doing the thing that California's done, which is to try to make campaigns a bit more competitive by, instead of having the general election between a Republican and a Democrat necessarily, just have a primary that has everybody's name on it, and let the top two compete during the general election, whether they both be Republicans or both be Democrats or however. We anticipate that we'll probably break some of the stalemate over the next few years, because it appears that the Democrats will gain large footing and may take control eventually of Arizona, Georgia, Texas, and a few other states. And we may have, at least for a period of time, a period of Democratic domination, which means that things could get done at that time. That is not a good solution long-term. A good solution long-term is to have two parties which compete heavily with each other and make the other responsible. You keep each other responsible. So that is what I'm looking for. Please do read the modules. There's a lot about Congress. I'm not trying to address very much. Read that, go through and read the text. And I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.